For 24 years I lived in the shadows. Not in some faraway prison, not in some distant land, but beneath the very home where I grew up, where my mother made dinner every night, where my siblings played in the yard above my head, where neighbours came to visit never knowing I was right there, underneath their feet. My name is Elizabeth Matthews, and this is my story. A story of survival that happened not in some movie, not in some distant country, but in a quiet suburban neighbourhood where evil hid behind a normal front door. Can you imagine disappearing from your own life at 18 and not seeing sunlight again until you were 42? Can you picture your own father becoming your captor, your warden, your nightmare? Most people think stories like mine only exist in horror films, but I'm here to tell you that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like your day. Before we go deeper into this journey together, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I was born Elizabeth Margaret Matthews in a small town where everyone knew everyone. My childhood looked normal from the outside. We lived in a 2-story house with a white picket fence. My father, Robert Matthews, was 51 when I was born. He was an engineer, respected in our community, someone people trusted. My mother, Sarah, was a quiet woman who kept house and raised us kids. I had 6 siblings, and we were just another American family trying to make it work. But inside our home, things were different. My father ruled with an iron fist. He decided everything, from what we ate for breakfast to what time we went to bed. He had rules for everything. Rules about talking, rules about walking, rules about breathing, it seemed. When he spoke, we listened. When he was angry, we scattered. My mother never questioned him, never protected us when his temper flared. Looking back now, I think she was as afraid of him as we were. As I got older, especially as a teenager, his control became suffocating. He monitored my every move, questioned every friend I had, controlled every aspect of my life. Other kids my age were going to parties, dating, planning for college. But not me. I was trapped in a prison that looked like a normal house from the street. The walls were closing in long before I ever saw the basement that would become my actual prison. August 28, 1984. I was 18 years old, and that date is burned into my memory forever. It was a humid summer day in our small town. I remember the smell of our neighbour's barbecue drifting through the windows, the sound of children playing in the street. Normal sounds of a normal summer day. I had no idea it would be the last normal day of my life for the next 24 years. My father called me downstairs that afternoon. "Elizabeth, I need your help in the basement," he said. "I'm installing a new door and I need someone to hold it while I fit the hinges." It seemed like a normal request. I'd helped him with projects before. He was always working on something, always improving the house. So I followed him down those wooden stairs, my hand trailing along the cold concrete wall. The basement smelled like dust and old paint. Tool benches lined the walls, and there were boxes stacked everywhere. But something felt different that day. There was a heaviness in the air that I couldn't explain. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw the door he was talking about. It was thick, heavy, made of metal. Not like the other doors in our house. "Just hold this steady," he told me, positioning me next to the door frame. I placed my hands where he showed me, trusting him like daughters are supposed to trust their fathers. That's when I smelled something strange, something chemical. Before I could turn around, before I could ask what it was, he pressed something over my face. A cloth soaked in something that burned my nose and throat. I tried to scream, tried to fight, but my legs gave out beneath me. The last thing I remember before everything went black was thinking, "Dad, what are you doing to me?" When I woke up, I was lying on a narrow bed in a room I'd never seen before. The walls were concrete, painted white but already showing stains. There was a toilet in one corner, a small sink, and a table with a few books on it. The air was thick and stale, and that door, that heavy metal door, was now sealed shut with multiple locks. I could hear them clicking when I pushed against it. Click, click, click. The sound of my freedom being locked away. Picture this. A room about the size of a large closet, with no windows, no fresh air, no sunlight. That became my entire world. The walls were my horizon. The ceiling was my sky. For the first few weeks, I thought it was temporary. I thought he was teaching me some kind of lesson, that he'd let me out when he'd made his point. But days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and I began to understand that this wasn't discipline. This was my new reality. The silence was the worst part at first. Complete, crushing silence. No birds singing, no cars driving by, no voices of my family upstairs. Just the hum of a small ventilator he'd installed and the sound of my own breathing. Sometimes I would talk to myself just to remember what my voice sounded like. I would tell myself stories, sing songs I remembered from the radio, anything to fill that terrible quiet. Time became meaningless down there. There were no clocks, no way to tell if it was day or night, no way to mark the passing of days or months. I tried to keep track by scratching marks on the wall, but eventually I lost count. Was it Tuesday? Was it winter? Had Christmas passed? I had no idea. Time just stopped. And with it, my connection to the world above disappeared. My father would visit me every day, usually in the morning, though I had no way of knowing for sure. He would bring me food, usually leftovers from whatever the family had eaten upstairs. Sometimes I could smell my mother's cooking on the plates, and it would make me cry because I knew she was so close, just 30 feet above my head. But I might as well have been on another planet. He controlled everything about my existence. What I ate, when I ate, what I wore, when I slept. He brought me books sometimes, usually old paperbacks or magazines that were months out of date. I read everything over and over again until I had them memorized. Those books became my escape, my only window into a world that felt increasingly like a dream I'd once had. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the simple freedoms you take for granted, the ability to open a door, to feel rain on your face, to see the sun, to hug someone you love, to make a phone call, to go to a store, to pet a dog, to feel grass under your feet. All of that was gone from my life in an instant, and I had no idea if I would ever experience any of it again. If you're still with me at this point, if you're walking through this darkness with me, I want to know. Type "I'm still here" in the comments. Let me know who's listening to my story, who's willing to hear the hardest parts, because it's about to get even more difficult. In 1988, 4 years into my captivity, everything changed again. I became pregnant. At 22 years old, trapped in a basement, I was going to become a mother. Can you imagine the terror and confusion I felt? How do you prepare for childbirth when you're locked in a concrete room with no medical care, no support, no help? My first child, a daughter I named Catherine, was born in that basement in 1988. I delivered her myself, with no doctor, no midwife, no pain medication. Just me, alone, in that concrete room. When she took her first breath, when she opened her eyes and looked at me, I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years. Pure love. In that moment of incredible joy mixed with overwhelming fear, I made her a promise. I promised that even though she was born in darkness, I would make sure she knew light. Even though she was born in captivity, I would make sure she knew freedom in her heart. Catherine never saw the sun for the first 19 years of her life. Think about that for a moment. 19 years without sunlight, without fresh air, without seeing a bird or a tree or feeling rain. But I was determined that she would know love, that she would know safety within the walls of our prison. I sang to her every day. I made up stories about the world outside. I taught her to read using the books my father brought down. I created a world of imagination for her in that concrete box. 2 years later, I had a son, Stephen. Then came another daughter, Lisa, in 1992. Each birth was a miracle and a nightmare combined. I was bringing beautiful, innocent children into a world of captivity. but I was also creating the only family I had, the only love I could give and receive in that dark place. My father made a decision that still haunts me. When Lisa was just 9 months old, he took her upstairs. He told my mother and the community that I had left Lisa on the doorstep with a note, that I was living in a cult somewhere and couldn't care for my children. My mother raised Lisa as her own granddaughter, never knowing that her daughter was 30 feet below, crying every night for the baby that had been taken from her arms. The same thing happened with 2 more of my children. Monica and Alexander were also taken upstairs when they were babies. So I lived this impossible reality. Some of my children were raised in captivity with me, and others were raised in freedom above our heads, thinking their mother had abandoned them. Can you imagine the pain of having your babies taken away and given to your own mother, who had no idea you were right there beneath her feet? Catherine, Stephen, and later my youngest Felix stayed with me in the basement. We created our own little family in that underground world. I homeschooled them with whatever materials I could get. I taught them math using bottle caps as counters. I taught them history by making up stories. I taught them about art by having them draw on the backs of old envelopes. They called our prison the room because they didn't know there was anything else. While I was raising children in a concrete prison, life went on above my head as if nothing had happened. My father continued to be the respected family man, the reliable neighbour, the helpful community member. He went to work every day, came home for dinner, watched television with my mother, attended family gatherings. He played with the grandchildren he had stolen from me, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, who grew up thinking their mother was a selfish woman who had abandoned them to join a cult. My mother, Sarah, never suspected anything. She grieved for her missing daughter, never knowing I was right beneath her kitchen floor. She raised 3 of my children as her own grandchildren, loving them and caring for them while I ached for them in the darkness below. Sometimes I could hear her footsteps above, hear her voice when she called the children for dinner, hear the television playing in the evening. Christmas was the worst. I could hear the laughter, the gift wrapping, the family celebrations. I would tell Catherine, Stephen, and Felix about Christmas, describe the decorations and the presents and the family dinners, and they would ask me why we couldn't celebrate Christmas too. How do you explain to a child that they're living in a hidden world? How do you tell them that their grandmother is upstairs making Christmas cookies not knowing they exist? Neighbours would come and go. I could sometimes hear their voices through the thin concrete, hear them talking to my mother about normal things. The weather, local gossip, concerns about bills or health. Normal life continued in every way, while just below their feet, an entire family lived in secret captivity. If those neighbours had known, if anyone had suspected, if my mother had asked the right questions, everything could have been different. By 2008, we had been living underground for almost 24 years. Catherine was 19, Stephen was 17, and Felix was 5. They had never seen the outside world, never experienced anything beyond the walls of our basement prison. But Catherine had been getting sick. Really sick. She was having seizures, terrible headaches, and was losing weight rapidly. I begged my father to get her medical help. For weeks, I pleaded with him every time he came downstairs. "She's dying," I told him. "Please, she needs a hospital, she needs a doctor." But he kept saying no, kept insisting that it would pass, that she'd be fine. I watched my eldest daughter, my firstborn child, the baby I had delivered in that concrete room 19 years earlier, growing weaker every day. Finally, on April 19th, 2008, Catherine collapsed. She was unconscious, barely breathing, and I knew that if she didn't get help immediately, she would die in my arms. I had never been more terrified in my life. This was my child, my beautiful daughter who had never hurt anyone, who had spent her entire life trapped because of decisions adults had made before she was even born. I faced an impossible choice. If my father took Catherine to the hospital, there would be questions. Questions about who she was, where she came from, why a 19-year-old girl had never been to a doctor before. Questions that might lead to the discovery of our hidden family. But if he didn't take her, she would die, and I couldn't let my daughter die because of fear. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I wrote a note and hid it in Catherine's pocket. A note that explained who she was, who I was, and where we were. I knew that getting her help might mean exposing everything, might mean changing our lives forever. But I also knew that losing her would destroy what was left of my heart. As my father carried my unconscious daughter up those stairs, I didn't know if I was saving her life or destroying the only world we'd ever known. 3 days later, my father came down to the basement looking different than I'd ever seen him. He looked scared, nervous, almost frantic. "You need to come with me," he said. "The hospital wants to talk to you about Catherine." For the first time in 24 years, he was asking me to leave the basement. For the first time since I was 18 years old, I was going to see the sun. Walking up those stairs felt like climbing out of my own grave. Each step was a step back into a world I'd been erased from. When my father opened the door at the top of the stairs, the light hit me like a physical force. I had to cover my eyes and wait for them to adjust. The air felt different, smelled different. I could hear sounds I'd forgotten existed. Cars, birds, the distant sound of children playing. My mother was standing in the kitchen when we emerged. The look on her face when she saw me is something I'll never forget. Confusion, shock, disbelief, and then recognition. "Elizabeth," she whispered, and I could see her trying to understand how her daughter, missing for 24 years, was suddenly standing in her kitchen looking like she'd aged decades overnight. We went to the hospital to see Catherine. She was stable, the doctor said, but they had questions, lots of questions, about who we were, where we'd been, why this 19-year-old girl had no medical records, no identification, no history of existing in the world. When the police arrived at the hospital, I knew it was time to tell the truth. Sitting in that hospital room with fluorescent lights overhead and the smell of antiseptic in the air, I told my story for the first time in 24 years. I told them about the basement, about my children, about the life we'd been living 30 feet below a normal suburban house. I watched their faces change as they realized this wasn't a story from some horror movie. This was real. This had been happening while they lived their normal lives just miles away. The police went to the house and found Stephen and Felix still in the basement. My 17-year-old son and my 5-year-old son, walking up those stairs into sunlight for the first time in their lives. Can you imagine what that must have felt like for them? Everything they thought they knew about the world was suddenly completely different. The media called me a victim, and I understand why. But I've never seen myself that way. I see myself as a survivor. I see myself as a mother who kept her children alive and sane in an insane situation. I see myself as a woman who found strength she never knew she had, who created love and hope in a place designed to destroy both. The adjustment to the outside world was harder than you might think. After 24 years underground, simple things became overwhelming. The sky seemed impossibly vast. Traffic was terrifyingly loud. There were so many people, so many choices, so many colours and sounds and smells. My children, especially Catherine, Stephen and Felix, had to learn how to live in a world they'd never experienced. They had to learn about cars and planes and smartphones and the internet. They had to learn about a society that had moved forward 24 years while they lived in a bubble frozen in time. But we learned together. We learned about healing together. We learned about trust again, about safety again, about what it means to have choices in your own life. My children, all 7 of them, including Lisa, Monica and Alexander, who had grown up upstairs, became a family in a way we'd never been able to be before. Today we live quietly, privately, building new lives from the pieces of the old ones. My children are adults now, making their own choices, pursuing their own dreams. Catherine became a teacher. Stephen works with computers. Felix is studying medicine because he wants to help people the way the doctors helped him when he first came into the light. Lisa, Monica and Alexander, who grew up thinking I had abandoned them, learned the truth about their mother and chose forgiveness over anger. People ask me how I survived, how I kept my sanity, how I kept hope alive in such a dark place. The answer is simple. Love. Love for my children. Love for the idea that someday things could be different. Love for the parts of life that couldn't be taken away even in captivity. The connection between human beings. The power of imagination. The strength that comes from deciding to keep living, even when living seems impossible. Your life might feel difficult sometimes. You might feel trapped by circumstances, by other people's expectations, by fears about the future. But I want you to remember that as long as you have breath in your body, as long as you have love in your heart, there is always hope for change. There is always the possibility that tomorrow can be different from today. I spent 24 years in physical captivity, but I never let my spirit be truly imprisoned. Whatever prison you might find yourself in, whether it's physical, emotional, or mental, remember that the most important freedom is the freedom to choose how you respond to your circumstances. Choose love. Choose hope. Choose to believe that your story isn't over yet. My name is Elizabeth Matthews, and if you're still here, if you've walked through this darkness with me, then you've become part of my story of survival. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that stories like mine matter, that voices like mine deserve to be heard. If my story has moved you, if it's made you think about your own life differently, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let no one's pain remain hidden. Let no one's survival go unrecognized. And remember that sometimes the most ordinary-looking houses hide the most extraordinary stories of human endurance. From the darkness to the light, from captivity to freedom, from victim to survivor, this is my story. And now it's part of yours too.